Right after the judge banged his gavel to finalize our divorce, my mother-in-law cornered me on the courthouse steps. "Do not ever set foot in my house again." "Get out!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. I just smiled, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "Actually, Beatrice, I already sold that house, and I just fired your son as CEO. If you have ever had to systematically destroy a toxic family to get your life back, hit that like button and subscribe because you will want to hear exactly how I dismantled their entire empire in under 10 minutes. My name is Madeline, and at 33 years old, I work as a corporate restructuring consultant for one of the most aggressive private equity firms in New York. I fix broken companies by trimming the fat and cutting out the dead weight. For the past 5 years, the heaviest dead weight in my life was my husband, Spencer. At 35, Spencer was the CEO of Vanguard Innovations, his family's tech company. He inherited the title, the corner office, and a staggering amount of arrogance, but absolutely none of the business acumen required to actually run a corporation. Spencer filed for divorce 3 months ago. He thought he was a genius. He had spent the last year secretly transferring funds into offshore trusts and moving assets around all so he could leave me with nothing and run off with his 25-year-old executive assistant, Kelsey. As we stepped out of the heavy bronze doors of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air, Spencer was practically glowing with smug satisfaction. He stood next to Kelsey, who was clinging to his arm and carrying a designer bag she definitely could not afford on an assistant's salary. Spencer thought he had won. He thought he had successfully hidden his wealth and discarded me like a broken toy. But he was not the one I was looking at. Beatrice, his 62-year-old mother, marched directly into my path, blocking my way to the street. She was dripping in pearls and old money entitlement, her face twisted into a vicious sneer. "You finally got what you deserved, Madeline." Beatrice spat the words like venom. "You came into our family with nothing, and now you are leaving with nothing. I always knew you were just a cheap gold digger trying to bleed my son dry. Now listen to me very carefully. Do not ever set foot in my house again. Get out of our lives." I did not cry. I did not flinch. I slowly checked my watch, noting the exact time. The stock market had just closed. "Your house," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue. "That is an interesting way to describe a property you no longer own, Beatrice." Beatrice scoffed, exchanging a mocking glance with Spencer. "She is delusional from the shock." Spencer chuckled, pulling Kelsey closer. "Let her walk to the subway, Mom. We have a victory dinner to attend at the club." I raised my hand, signaling my lawyer, Nate. Nate is 40 years old, sharp as a razor, and never speaks unless it is legally devastating. He stepped forward from the shadows of the courthouse pillars and handed me a thick manila folder. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper and held it up for Beatrice to read. "This is a notice of foreclosure and immediate seizure," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The estate on Oakwood Drive is currently being repossessed by my private equity firm." The smirk vanished from Beatrice's face. "What kind of garbage is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in a sudden panic. "We own that estate outright. It has been in the family for 3 generations. It is impenetrable." "It was in the family," I corrected, "until 2 years ago. Do you remember when Vanguard Innovations was on the brink of bankruptcy? You came to my office, Beatrice. You literally begged me, crying on my sofa, to use my connections to secure a bailout loan to save Spencer from going to federal prison for corporate negligence." Spencer stepped forward, his face flushing red with sudden rage. "You secured a standard corporate loan, Madeline. Vanguard makes the minimum monthly payments. You cannot touch our personal property." I turned my gaze to my ex-husband, the man who truly thought he was the smartest person in any room. "Spencer, I am a restructuring consultant. I do not do standard loans. I deal in distressed assets. When I secured that bailout for you, my firm bought up all of your toxic debt. I personally drafted the collateral agreement, the one you signed in a rush without reading the fine print. You put up your shares in Vanguard and the family estate as collateral against the loan principal. And since you deliberately missed the balloon payment deadline at midnight last night, the collateral is now legal property of my firm." Beatrice lunged forward, her hand raised to slap me across the face. "How dare you steal my home, you ungrateful thief!" Before her hand could even come close to my cheek, someone intercepted her wrist mid-air. It was Terrence. At 32, Terrence is an incredibly sharp African American senior auditor, and he also happens to be married to Spencer's younger sister, Vanessa. Terrence had always been the only sane person in this toxic family, and he despised his in-laws just as much as I did. I would not do that, Beatrice, Terrence said, his deep voice radiating absolute authority. Assaulting a major creditor on the steps of a federal courthouse is a great way to end up in a holding cell. He firmly pushed her arm away and stepped forward to stand by my side. Beatrice gasped, stumbling back into Spencer. You are taking her side, Terrence. After everything this family has done for you, Terrence adjusted his glasses, completely unfazed by her outburst. This family has done nothing but rack up debt, exploit workers, and commit tax fraud, Beatrice. I am just here to make sure the math adds up, and Madeline's math is absolutely flawless. Spencer glared at Terrence, then turned his fury back to me. Fine, Spencer barked, desperately trying to regain control in front of his young mistress. You want to play hardball, keep the stupid house. I will just have Vanguard's accounting department cut a check tomorrow morning and buy the estate back from your firm. 15 million is pocket change for my company. Come on, Kelsey, let us get out of here. Spencer turned his back on me, pulling his smartphone from his designer suit pocket to call his driver. I watched him dial, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment I had been planning for months. You cannot use company funds, Spencer, I said, my voice cutting through the chilly air like a blade. He paused, looking over his shoulder with a deeply patronizing glare. I am the CEO, Madeline. I run the board. I can do whatever I want. I took a slow step closer, looking him dead in the eye. You were the CEO. Past tense. Spencer froze. Kelsey stopped chewing her gum, her eyes darting between us. Beatrice gripped her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with mounting terror as the reality of my words began to sink in. While we were sitting in that courtroom finalizing our divorce today, I continued. My firm exercised its newly acquired voting rights. Since we seized your shares this morning due to your loan default, we are now the majority shareholders of Vanguard Innovations. And exactly 10 minutes ago, the board concluded an emergency vote. Spencer furiously tapped his phone screen, opening his corporate management application. I watched the reflection of the screen in his eyes. He swiped down to refresh the page. Instead of his usual executive dashboard, a bright red banner flashed across the screen. Access denied. Your keycard is deactivated, I informed him, watching the color drain entirely from his arrogant face. Your corporate accounts are frozen. You do not have a company. You do not have a house. And judging by the fact that you transferred all your remaining liquid cash into offshore accounts that my forensic team flagged for the IRS this morning, you do not have a dime to your name. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp, swaying unsteadily on her designer heels. I pulled my coat tight against the wind and gave my former mother-in-law a polite, razor-thin smile. So, Beatrice, I believe you were saying something about getting out of your life. Consider it done. I turned and walked down the courthouse steps, leaving them standing on the concrete, utterly destroyed. But stripping them of their wealth was only the beginning. They had no idea what was waiting for them back at the mansion. The tires of Spencer's sports car screeched against the asphalt as he recklessly sped down the highway toward the Oakwood Drive estate. From the back seat of the car I had taken with Nate, I watched their vehicle weave erratically through traffic. Beatrice was likely hyperventilating in the passenger seat, screaming at her son to drive faster so they could lock the heavy wrought iron gates before I arrived. They honestly thought changing a padlock could stop a federal repossession. By the time Nate and I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of the mansion, Spencer's car was already parked at a crooked angle on the pristine lawn, but Beatrice and Spencer were completely frozen on the front steps. They were too late. 3 massive white moving trucks were already backed up to the grand mahogany double doors. Men in matching uniforms were swiftly carrying out custom furniture, rolled-up Persian rugs, and gilded mirrors. I stepped out of my vehicle and walked briskly up the driveway, my heels clicking against the cobblestones in a steady, unbothered rhythm. Beatrice snapped out of her shock and shoved her way past 2 movers carrying a velvet settee. She stormed into the grand foyer, her heels slipping slightly on the imported Italian marble. I followed right behind her, with Nate silently observing from the doorway. The foyer was a hive of organized efficiency. My liquidation team was cataloging every single high-value item in the house to offset the massive defaulted loan. Beatrice let out a blood-curdling shriek when she saw a young mover carefully wrapping bubble wrap around a massive hand-painted porcelain vase. "Put that down right now!" Beatrice screamed, her face contorting with absolute fury. "That is a 17th century Ming Dynasty antique. It has been in my family for decades. You filthy minimum wage grunt, take your hands off my property." The young mover blinked, startled by her sudden aggression, but he kept his grip firmly on the vase. "Ma'am, I have a court order to secure all assets on this property." Beatrice did not even let him finish his sentence. She raised her hand and slapped the young man so hard across the face that the sharp crack echoed against the vaulted ceiling. The mover stumbled backward, his cheek instantly turning red, but he miraculously managed to keep the heavy vase from hitting the floor. Spencer and Kelsey rushed into the foyer just in time to witness the assault. Spencer puffed out his chest, attempting to look authoritative. "Good for you, Mom. Tell these trespassers to get out of our house." I stepped smoothly around Spencer, placing myself directly between Beatrice and the young mover. I looked at the young man whose hand was hovering over his stinging cheek. "Are you all right, David?" I asked calmly. He nodded, looking shaken. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Beatrice. "Nate, please ensure David receives a $5,000 bonus on his paycheck today for hazardous hazard duty. And go ahead and add physical assault to the list of criminal charges we are forwarding to the local precinct." Beatrice scoffed loudly, adjusting her pearl necklace as if she had just swatted a fly. "Do not try to intimidate me with your cheap legal threats, Madeline. I am Beatrice Vanguard. I sit on the board of the Women's Philanthropy League. I dine with senators. You cannot just march into my home and steal my generational wealth because your pathetic little marriage failed." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Beatrice held her ground, but her eyes darted nervously to the clipboard in my hand. "Generational wealth," I repeated, letting a cold laugh escape my lips. "That is a fascinating term for it, Beatrice. Let us talk about this 17th century vase you love so much." I flipped open the clipboard and read directly from the highlighted forensic accounting report my team had finalized at dawn. "You purchased this vase on October 14th, 3 years ago, at a private auction in Geneva. The winning bid was $420,000. I snapped the clipboard shut. "You claimed it was an heirloom. But the truth is, you bought it to impress the billionaire wives club you are so desperate to fit into." Beatrice raised her chin, though her hands were visibly trembling. "I can buy whatever I please. I am a wealthy woman." "You are a thief," I corrected, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Because you did not use your own money, Beatrice. When I initiated the bailout restructuring for Vanguard Innovations, my team had to audit every single corporate account. We found a massive gaping hole in the company ledger. You needed cash to fund your fake old money lifestyle, so you convinced Spencer to grant you unrestricted access to the corporate accounts. And then you funneled $420,000 directly out of the Vanguard Employee Pension Fund." Spencer went completely rigid. He turned to his mother, his jaw dropping open. "Mom, what is she talking about? You said you took an advance on your dividends. You touched the pension fund." I did not even look at Spencer as I continued dismantling her. "You stole the retirement savings of the engineers and developers who built this company, Beatrice. You embezzled from hardworking people just so you could put a pretty piece of pottery in your foyer and pretend you were better than everyone else. So, no, this vase is not your generational wealth. It is a stolen asset, and my firm is seizing it to pay back the people you robbed." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The illusion of her grand, untouchable superiority was shattering into a million pieces right in front of her son and his mistress. She looked wildly around the empty foyer, her breathing turning shallow and erratic. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch and let out a strangled gasp. "Spencer, the pre-gala brunch. My philanthropy board members are arriving in 20 minutes. We are hosting the charity kickoff. You have to get her out of here, Spencer. If they see this, I will be ruined." She grabbed Spencer's arm, shaking him frantically. "Call the police, call the mayor, do something!" Spencer was too busy processing his own criminal liability regarding the pension fund to comfort his mother. He backed away from her, rubbing his temples in a panic. I signaled to the head of the moving crew. "Bring out the primary closet inventory. Place it exactly where I instructed." The movers nodded. Moments later, a line of men emerged from the master wing, carrying heavy-duty black trash bags and a dozen distinctive monogrammed designer suitcases. They did not carry them delicately. They marched straight out the front doors and forcefully tossed Beatrice's Louis Vuitton Chanel and Hermes luggage right onto the hard concrete of the driveway. The bags tumbled over each other, spilling expensive silk scarves and cashmere sweaters into the dirt. Beatrice screamed, running out onto the front steps. "My clothes! My custom bags! Have you lost your mind?" Right at that exact second, the sound of luxury engines echoed up the private road. A parade of sleek black Mercedes Range Rovers and Bentleys began rolling through the open wrought iron gates. The Women's Philanthropy Board had arrived for their scheduled mimosa brunch. The luxury vehicles slowly parked around the circular driveway. The wealthiest, most judgmental women in the city stepped out of their cars, adjusting their designer sunglasses and smoothing their perfectly tailored dresses. They froze instantly. Instead of a catered garden party, they walked into a chaotic foreclosure scene. They stared in absolute shock at Beatrice, the supposedly untouchable matriarch of the Vanguard family, standing on her porch with her hair disheveled. They looked at the massive moving trucks. They looked at the repossession notices taped to the grand mahogany doors. And finally their eyes landed on Beatrice's highly recognizable designer luggage, sitting in a pathetic discarded heap on the dirty concrete. The sleek black vehicles idled in a perfect semicircle around the driveway, their engines humming quietly in the crisp afternoon air. 4 women dripping in diamonds and wrapped in tailored cashmere stepped out of their cars. They were the apex predators of the local high society women who controlled charity boards and dictated social standings with a single glance. Right now, those glances were locked in absolute horror on the pile of black trash bags and discarded designer luggage sitting in the dirt. Beatrice went into a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. The color drained from her face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a pale mask. She let out a high-pitched, frantic laugh that sounded more like a choke, sprinting down the front steps toward the women. Her heels wobbled on the pavement, but she forced her arms open in a welcoming gesture, desperately trying to block their view of the repossession notices taped to her own front doors. "Catherine. Penelope. My dear friends," Beatrice cried out, her voice pitching up an octave. "Please do not mind this ridiculous mess. It is just a temporary misunderstanding. My son's ex-wife is having a severe mental breakdown over the divorce. She hired these goons to stage a scene because she is incredibly jealous of our family. You know how these desperate women get when they lose access to real wealth." Catherine, a sharp-featured woman who chaired the hospital fundraising committee, took a slow step back, avoiding Beatrice's outstretched hands. She looked from the moving trucks to the burly men carrying a grand piano out the front door. "A staged scene," Catherine asked, her voice laced with heavy skepticism. "Beatrice, there are federal marshals standing on your front porch." I walked smoothly down the driveway, my posture relaxed, holding a sleek black leather folder in my hands. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch, allowing Beatrice to sweat under the intense scrutiny of the women she worshipped. Nate walked a few paces behind me, his arms crossed, watching the social execution unfold. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said, coming to a stop right next to the pile of discarded Hermes bags. "Beatrice is correct about one thing. There is a severe breakdown happening today, but it is entirely financial." Beatrice lunged toward me, her eyes wide with terror. "Shut your mouth, Madeline. Do not say another word to my friends. Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." I ignored her completely and turned my attention directly to Catherine. I opened the leather folder and pulled out a stack of paper-clipped documents neatly highlighted with bright yellow marker. "Catherine," I began, keeping my tone strictly professional. "Last month you graciously provided Beatrice with a personal loan of $50,000. She told you it was a short-term bridge loan for a highly exclusive commercial real estate investment, correct?" Catherine frowned, her posture stiffening. "Yes." She said the Vanguard portfolio was temporarily tied up in a merger and she needed liquid cash for a few weeks. She guaranteed a 20% return. I handed Catherine the first stack of papers. Those are Beatrice's private bank statements obtained legally during a corporate audit this morning. You will see that your $50,000 never went into a real estate venture. Exactly 12 minutes after you wired her the funds, Beatrice used them to pay off the minimum balance on her American Express card to avoid a default. The remaining balance was spent at a private jeweler in Paris to purchase the exact diamond tennis bracelet she is currently wearing on her right wrist. Beatrice gasped instinctively, grabbing her wrist and trying to pull her sleeve down to hide the diamonds. "It is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She forged those documents. Catherine, you cannot believe this gold digger over me. I am a vanguard." Catherine did not look at Beatrice. She was too busy reading the highlighted bank statements, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Penelope, another wealthy board member, leaned over Catherine's shoulder to read the numbers. I pulled out the second stack of papers and handed them to Penelope. "And Penelope, that generous $25,000 donation you entrusted to Beatrice for the Children's Hospital Gala. It went directly to a luxury wellness retreat in Switzerland and a series of private cosmetic procedures. Beatrice has not had access to actual wealth in years. She has been funding her entire lifestyle by treating her friends like a personal piggy bank." Penelope snatched the papers from my hand, her face turning crimson with outrage. "You stole from a children's charity, Beatrice. You took my money for a facelift." "Please," Beatrice begged, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her mascara. "It was just a cash flow issue. Spencer was going to pay me back from the company accounts. I swear to you I am good for it. You know my family. You know our legacy." "Legacy does not pay the bills, Beatrice," I said softly. "But the theft is not even the most interesting part of this folder." I pulled out a final sheet of paper. It was a printed transcript of text messages. My brother-in-law Terrence had extracted them from the company servers during his forensic audit. "When you borrow money from someone, Beatrice, you really should not use your corporate phone to text your son about them," I noted, handing the transcript to Catherine. Catherine read the text messages out loud, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Tell Catherine I need another week. Her husband is too stupid to notice the money is missing anyway, and she is too desperate for my approval to ask for it back." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the driveway. The only sound was the heavy thud of movers loading boxes into the trucks. Beatrice stood completely frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she stared at the women she had spent decades trying to impress. The illusion was dead. The curtain had fallen. Catherine threw the bank statements directly onto the ground at Beatrice's feet. "You are a pathetic broke fraud, Beatrice. You will have a lawsuit filed against you by my attorneys before the end of the day. Do not ever contact me again." Penelope scoffed in disgust, turning on her heel. "Let us go, ladies. I feel dirty just standing here." "Wait, please," Beatrice sobbed, falling to her knees on the hard concrete, her hands grasping desperately at the air. "Catherine, I can explain. Please do not leave me like this." The women ignored her cries. They marched back to their luxury vehicles in unison. Car doors slammed shut one after another. Engines roared to life, and the convoy of Mercedes and Bentleys drove swiftly down the road and out through the iron gates, leaving Beatrice kneeling in the dirt next to her garbage bags, utterly and completely ruined. I watched the cars disappear, feeling a profound sense of closure. I turned to walk back to my vehicle to finalize the repossession paperwork with Nate. Suddenly, the harsh screech of tires broke the quiet. A dark gray, heavily tinted sedan swerved into the driveway, braking aggressively just inches from the moving trucks. The driver's door flew open and a man in a cheap, shiny suit stepped out, clutching a thick leather briefcase. It was Todd, a sleazy defense attorney Spencer kept on retainer for emergencies. Spencer, who had been frantic on his phone pacing near the garage, sprinted toward the sedan. He grabbed a thick legal packet from Todd's hands. His face, previously pale with panic, suddenly flushed with a renewed, arrogant fury. Kelsey, his mistress, trotted closely behind him, her smug smile returning in full force as she clung to his jacket. Spencer marched directly toward my car, his dress shoes slamming against the pavement. He did not care that his mother was crying on the ground. He only cared about his money. He reached the hood of my car and violently slapped the legal packet down against the metal right in front of me. He leaned over at a manic, triumphant grin spreading across his face. You think you are so smart, Madeline Spencer barked, pointing a finger at the documents. You think you can just fire me and take my company? You forgot my executive contract. You forgot my golden parachute clause. If the board terminates me without cause, the company owes me an immediate payout. You owe me $15 million in severance, Madeline. Pay up. Spencer stood there breathing heavily with his hand still pressed flat against the thick legal packet on the hood of my car. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He actually believed that throwing a stack of papers at me would somehow erase the fact that he was currently trespassing on a property my firm had just seized. Before I could even reach for the document, Kelsey decided it was her moment to shine. She stepped out from behind Spencer, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder with an exaggerated sigh. She linked her arm through his and gave me a pitying look that was so painfully rehearsed it almost made me laugh. You really thought you could just kick us out and leave us with nothing? Kelsey sneered, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Spencer is the CEO. He built that company. We are taking that $15 million and starting fresh. Maybe we will buy a villa in Malibu or spend a year in the south of France. You are just the bitter starter wife, Madeline. I am the future of this family. Now be a good girl and sign the check so we can leave this depressing place. I looked at Kelsey. I did not feel angry. I just felt a profound sense of secondhand embarrassment for a woman who was wrapping her entire identity around a man who was about 30 seconds away from a federal indictment. I turned my attention away from the mistress and looked at Todd, the cheap defense attorney Spencer had dragged along. Todd was sweating profusely in a suit that looked like it came off a discount rack. I picked up the legal packet from the hood of my car. I did not open it. I simply weighed it in my hands, feeling the cheap single-ply paper Todd had used to print it. Spencer. I began keeping my voice incredibly calm. You paid a bottom-tier lawyer to drive all the way out here to threaten me with a contract that I personally drafted for you 4 years ago. Did you really think I would forget the terms of your executive agreement? Spencer crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. A contract is a contract, Madeline. You orchestrated a hostile takeover and had the board terminate me without cause. The golden parachute clause dictates an immediate, unconditional payout of $15 million upon my exit. It is bulletproof. Todd assured me you have no legal ground to deny the severance. I slowly opened the folder. I flipped past the first few pages of legal jargon until I reached the 7th page. I ran my manicured finger down the text. It is almost bulletproof, I corrected him. But there is a reason my firm pays me 7 figures to restructure corporate entities, Spencer. I never leave a back door unlocked. And I certainly never write a $15 million check without a failsafe. I held the document up and read the text aloud, making sure every single word echoed clearly across the driveway. Section 7, Paragraph B. The executive severance package, colloquially referred to as the golden parachute, is entirely and immediately forfeited in the event of termination due to gross financial misconduct, embezzlement, or corporate fraud. I snapped the folder shut and handed it directly to Todd, who looked like he was about to be sick. Your client was not terminated without cause, Todd, I said, looking right through the sweating lawyer. The board fired him for cause, specifically for gross financial misconduct. He is not getting $15 million. He is getting nothing. Spencer threw his head back and let out a loud, arrogant laugh. He clapped his hands together slowly, acting as if he had just caught me in a trap. You are desperate, Madeline, Spencer mocked, taking a step closer to me. You are grasping at straws because you know you lost. Gross financial misconduct. You have absolutely zero proof of that. My accounting department is completely under my control. I review every single ledger before it goes to the board. My books are spotless. You cannot just invent a fraud charge to get out of paying my severance. If you try to take this to a judge, I will sue you for defamation and wring another $10 million out of your firm. Kelsey smirked, leaning her head against Spencer's shoulder. Tell her, babe. She is just making things up because she is jealous. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked past Spencer's shoulder toward the open iron gates at the end of the driveway. Right on cue, the low, steady hum of a powerful engine cut through the tension. A sleek, midnight black sedan turned into the estate, its tires crunching heavily against the gravel. The vehicle glided to a smooth stop right behind Spencer's crookedly parked sports car. Spencer and Kelsey turned around, frowning at the unexpected arrival. Beatrice, who was still weeping on the ground near her garbage bags, looked up with wide, mascara-stained eyes. The driver's side door opened. Terrence stepped out into the afternoon light. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy suit, looking every bit the ruthless financial professional he was. His expression was completely unreadable, a mask of absolute terrifying competence. He walked around to the trunk of his sedan, popped it open, and pulled out a massive, heavy-duty fireproof lockbox. He carried the heavy metal case with both hands, his dress shoes clicking methodically against the pavement as he approached our group. Spencer glared at his brother-in-law. "Terrence, what the hell are you doing here? Did you come to help Mom pack her trash?" Terrence ignored the insult. He walked straight up to the hood of my car and set the heavy lockbox down with a loud, resounding thud that made Kelsey jump. He rested his hand flat on top of the metal lid and looked Spencer directly in the eye. "You are right about one thing," Spencer Terrence said, his deep voice slicing through the cold air. "Your books were spotless. The internal ledgers you presented to the board were beautifully fabricated masterpieces of creative accounting. They were absolutely flawless." Spencer smirked, shooting me a triumphant look. "See, even your own brother-in-law admits I run a tight ship. You have nothing." Terrence slowly shook his head, his face devoid of any amusement. "They were spotless, Spencer. Right up until the board of directors hired me as an independent external auditor at 7 o'clock this morning." Spencer stared at the heavy metal lockbox on the hood of my car, his confident smirk finally faltering. He pointed a shaking finger at Terrence. "You cannot audit my company. You are just my sister's husband. You do not have the authority to look at my private ledgers." I stepped forward, tapping the cover of the lockbox. "I have the authority, Spencer. As the new majority shareholder of Vanguard Innovations, my first official act at 7 o'clock this morning was hiring a senior auditor I could actually trust. Terrence happens to be the best in the business." Terrence did not smile. He simply unlatched the metal lid and flipped it open. The box was packed to the brim with thick, bound financial reports and encrypted hard drives. He pulled out the top folder, flipping it open to a spreadsheet covered in red ink. "You were sloppy," Spencer Terrence said, his deep voice projecting effortless authority. "You thought hiding your tracks in the auxiliary accounts would keep the board in the dark, but you left a massive digital footprint. Over the past 12 months, you authorized over $5 million in fictitious vendor invoices. You billed Vanguard for software consulting services that were never rendered, and you wired those funds directly into 3 newly formed shell companies." Spencer swallowed hard. The veins in his neck bulged as he looked around suddenly, very aware of the moving crew and the lawyers watching his downfall. "You cannot prove those companies are mine," Spencer stammered, his voice pitching higher. "Those are legitimate third-party contractors. You are making wild accusations to help your bossy ex-wife steal my severance." Terrence did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply pulled out a second stack of papers. "I tracked the routing numbers, Spencer. Every single dollar of that $5 million was siphoned out of Vanguard and deposited into private offshore accounts. Accounts that were opened just 3 weeks before you filed for divorce against Madeline. You were bleeding your own family company dry to hide assets from the divorce settlement." Before Spencer could formulate another pathetic lie, the loud screech of luxury tires interrupted us. A white Range Rover sped up the driveway, swerving recklessly around the parked moving trucks. The vehicle jerked to a halt, and Vanessa threw her door open. At 29 years old, Spencer's younger sister was a picture of spoiled entitlement. She was dressed head to toe in designer athletic wear, clutching her smartphone and a sleek black credit card. She marched straight toward us, completely ignoring the chaos of the repossession happening on the front lawn. "Terrence, you need to call the bank right now," Vanessa whined, waving the black card in the air. "I was just at the luxury boutique downtown, trying to buy my new seasonal wardrobe, and the cashier told me my card was declined. It was incredibly humiliating. Fix it. Tell them to increase my limit immediately." Terence looked at his wife. The profound disappointment in his eyes was heavy and silent. He did not reach for the card. He simply crossed his arms over his tailored navy suit. I cannot fix it, Vanessa, Terence said flatly. That is a corporate card tied to Vanguard Innovations. The accounts are frozen by federal regulators because your brother has been embezzling millions of dollars. Vanessa blinked, looking from Terence to Spencer, and then to the moving trucks hauling her mother's antique furniture out the front door. What are you talking about? Spencer is the CEO. We have endless money. Stop being dramatic and just call the bank. I need that wardrobe for our vacation next month. Terence shook his head, his posture rigid with years of suppressed frustration. There is no vacation, Vanessa. There is no endless money. I sat you down in our kitchen 3 years ago and showed you the real numbers. I begged you to look at the financial statements. I warned you that your mother and your brother were burning through stolen corporate funds to finance a fake lifestyle. I told you this house of cards was going to collapse. Vanessa took a step back, her lower lip trembling. But Mom said you were just being paranoid. She said you did not understand how generational wealth works. I understand mathematics, Vanessa Terence replied coldly. And I understand the law. I offered you a chance to build an honest life with me separate from this toxic family. But you chose to bury your head in the sand because you liked the designer bags and the luxury cars too much to ask where the money was coming from. I am not going down with this sinking ship to protect your delusions. Vanessa burst into tears, dropping the useless credit card onto the driveway. She turned to her mother Beatrice, who was still sitting in the dirt, completely unresponsive to her daughter's panic. Terence turned his attention back to me, effectively dismissing his wife's tantrum. He reached into the lockbox one last time and pulled out a bright red folder. He handed it directly to me. You will want to see this, Madeline, Terence said, his tone shifting back to strictly professional. Spencer was right about one thing. He did not put his own name on the incorporation documents for those 3 offshore shell companies. He knew any assets under his name would be flagged during the divorce discovery process. He needed a proxy. I opened the red folder. I scanned the highlighted legal documents, reading the primary shareholder signatures on the fraudulent corporate accounts. A slow, genuinely amused smile spread across my face. Spencer needed a proxy. I agreed, my eyes locked on the paperwork. He needed someone incredibly eager, incredibly ambitious, and just naive enough to sign a stack of complex legal documents without hiring an independent lawyer to read the fine print. I closed the folder and looked directly at Kelsey. The 25-year-old mistress was still clinging to Spencer's arm, but her smug expression had completely vanished. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. Well, Kelsey, I said, taking a step toward her, I have to congratulate you. It takes a lot of ambition to go from an executive assistant to a corporate owner in just a few months. Kelsey frowned, her grip on Spencer's arm loosening. What are you talking about? I do not own any companies. I tapped the red folder against my palm. According to these incorporation documents, you are the sole proprietor of all 3 offshore shell companies that currently hold $5 million in stolen corporate funds. Spencer did not just use you to replace his wife Kelsey, he used you as a legal meat shield. The chief defense attorney, Todd, let out a loud gasp and took a massive step away from Spencer. Kelsey's jaw dropped open. She stared at me, then slowly turned her horrified gaze toward Spencer, who was suddenly avoiding eye contact with everyone. You own the accounts, Kelsey. I continued, letting the brutal reality of the law crush her dreams of a beach villa in Malibu. And since you are the sole proprietor on paper, you are the one officially holding the stolen money. Which means, my dear future CEO wife, you are the one on the hook for federal wire fraud. The words federal wire fraud hung in the crisp afternoon air, heavy and suffocating. Kelsey stared at me, her perfectly glossed lips parted in absolute horror. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from the red folder in my hands to the cold, unforgiving concrete of the driveway. She looked like a woman who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for gravity to take over. Spencer, she whispered, her voice trembling as she turned toward the man she had banked her entire future on. Spencer, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell her those companies belong to you. Spencer did not look at her. He did not pull her into a reassuring embrace or promise to protect her. Instead, the former CEO of Vanguard Innovations took a very deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between himself and his mistress. He ran a hand through his expensive haircut, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. "You signed the papers," Kelsey Spencer muttered, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. "You were the one who authorized the wire transfers. Your name is on the sole proprietorship agreements." Kelsey let out a strangled gasp. She stumbled toward him, her manicured hands reaching out to grab the lapels of his custom-tailored suit jacket. "You told me it was a tax strategy for our new life. You said you needed to shelter the money temporarily so your ex-wife could not touch it during the divorce. You promised me we were buying a house in Malibu with those funds." Spencer's face twisted into an ugly cornered sneer. He grabbed Kelsey by her wrists and violently shoved her away from him. Kelsey lost her footing on her high heels and stumbled backward, falling hard onto the driveway right next to Beatrice's discarded garbage bags. "Get off me, you naive idiot." Spencer barked, his voice echoing sharply across the estate. "You read the documents before you sign them. Or maybe you did not because you were too busy picking out curtain colors for a house you do not even own. It is your signature on the bottom line, Kelsey. If the feds come knocking, you are the one holding the bag. I am entirely insulated." I stood next to Terrence, watching the facade of their grand romance crumble into dust in a matter of seconds. "Actually, Spencer," I interjected, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Coercing an employee to sign fraudulent incorporation documents carries its own set of severe federal penalties. And considering Terrence just handed me a mountain of digital evidence proving you orchestrated the entire scheme, your insulation is completely imaginary." Terrence nodded, adjusting his glasses. "The digital audit trail leads directly back to your secure executive terminal, Spencer. You might have used her signature, but you used your own IP address to execute the transfers." Kelsey sat on the concrete, staring at her scraped knees. The shock was wearing off rapidly, giving way to the fierce, blinding rage of a woman who finally realized she had been nothing more than a pawn. She slowly scrambled to her feet, ignoring the dirt on her expensive designer skirt. The tears of a victim dried up instantly, replaced by a venomous glare aimed directly at Spencer. "You think you can pin this on me?" Kelsey screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "You think I am just going to take the fall so you can walk away clean?" Spencer rolled his eyes, adjusting his suit jacket. "You do not have a choice, Kelsey. It is your name on the accounts. No one is going to believe a 25-year-old assistant over a corporate CEO. "I am not an idiot, Spencer." Kelsey fired back, marching right up to his face. "I kept everything. Every single text message. Every late-night email where you explicitly instructed me to sign those specific pages. I saved the voice memos where you bragged about siphoning money to hide cash from your bitter wife before the divorce settlement." The last drop of color drained from Spencer's face. He looked like he had just been struck by lightning. "You deleted those," he stammered, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "You swore to me you deleted those messages from the company server." "I did delete them from the company server," Kelsey sneered, pulling her smartphone from her purse and waving it aggressively in his face. "But I backed up every single file to a private cloud server the day you filed for divorce. I knew exactly what kind of snake you were, Spencer. I just thought we were going to be snakes together." Spencer lunged forward desperately, trying to grab the phone from her hand. "Give me that phone right now, Kelsey." Kelsey dodged his grasping hands and backed up toward my car, seeking the protective barrier of my security detail. "I am calling the police right now," she yelled, holding the phone high. "I am handing them the cloud passwords, the emails, the voice notes, all of it. I will gladly walk into a federal prosecutor's office and take an immunity deal just to watch you rot in a federal cell." Spencer looked around wildly. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He was completely trapped. His mother was ruined. His sister had turned against him. His company was gone. And now his mistress was about to hand-deliver him to the FBI. He opened his mouth to scream at her, to offer a bribe, to say anything that might stop her from dialing those 9 numbers. But before Spencer could speak, a sharp, piercing ringtone sliced through the chaotic noise of the driveway. It was not Kelsey's phone. It was Spencer's. Spencer froze. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his device. The screen illuminated his pale, terrified face. He stared at the caller ID, and a new, entirely different kind of terror washed over his features. The corporate fraud panic was suddenly replaced by sheer primal fear. I followed his line of sight, past the moving trucks, past the discarded luggage, and right outside the open wrought iron gates of the estate. A massive, heavily tinted black SUV was idling at the edge of the street. It had no license plates. It had not moved since the society women drove away. It was simply sitting there, the engine purring ominously, watching us. Spencer's hand shook violently as he swiped the screen to answer the call. He brought the phone to his ear, unable to tear his eyes away from the black SUV at the end of the road. "Hello, Spencer," whispered his voice, trembling so badly it barely registered. He listened for a few seconds. He did not say another word. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the concrete driveway with a sharp crack, the screen shattering instantly. The shattered screen of Spencer's phone mirrored his completely fractured reality. The black SUV did not wait for an invitation. It slowly crawled up the driveway, its tires crunching aggressively over the gravel, bypassing the moving trucks, and pulling right up to the manicured lawn. The vehicle had heavily tinted windows and absolutely no license plates. I stood my ground next to Terrence, observing the situation with cold, calculated precision. I had spent years dealing with distressed corporate assets, but this was an entirely different level of distress. 4 men stepped out of the vehicle. They were not wearing tailored corporate suits like Spencer. They wore heavy dark coats, thick boots, and an air of unmistakable quiet violence. The lead man, a broad-shouldered enforcer with a thick scar across his jaw, did not even look at me or Terrence. His dead shark-like eyes were locked entirely on my ex-husband. Beatrice was completely oblivious to the danger. Her vanity always blinded her to reality. She marched toward the men, pointing a manicured finger at their vehicle. "Move that monstrosity right now!" Beatrice screeched, demanding obedience from dangerous men as if they were country club waiters. "You are blocking my vintage Porsche, and you are trespassing on Vanguard property." The enforcer did not say a single word. He simply reached into his heavy coat, pulled out a solid steel baton, and casually walked over to Beatrice's pristine silver Porsche, parked near the fountain. Without breaking his stride, he swung the heavy metal baton downward. The steel collided with the windshield of Beatrice's beloved sports car, with a deafening explosive crash. Glass shattered everywhere, sparkling like crushed diamonds across the silver hood and scattering across the driveway. Beatrice let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping to her knees in the dirt. "My car. Are you insane? Spencer, call the police right now. Call the mayor." Spencer did not move. He was shaking so violently I could hear his breath hitching from 10 feet away. He looked like a terrified little boy, his arrogant CEO persona completely evaporating. The enforcer stepped over the broken glass, walking right past a weeping Beatrice, and stopped directly in front of Spencer. "You missed your payment yesterday, Spencer," the man said, his voice low and raspy, carrying a heavy street accent that did not belong in this wealthy suburb. "My boss does not like being sent to voicemail, especially not for a $3 million debt." Kelsey gasped loudly, backing away from Spencer as if he had suddenly caught fire. I watched the pieces fall into place perfectly. Spencer had not just embezzled from his own company. To maintain his lavish lifestyle fund, Kelsey's demands for designer clothes and luxury vacations, and quickly hide assets before filing for divorce, he had run out of liquid cash. He was desperate. So he turned to an illegal underground syndicate, borrowing millions from people who did not use corporate lawyers to settle their debts. Kelsey looked down at the massive diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, suddenly realizing the stones were paid for with dangerous blood money. She took another massive step back, trying to blend into the shadows of the moving trucks, desperate to avoid the enforcer's gaze. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, her face flushed with indignation and absolute terror. $3 million, Spencer. What is this thug talking about? Just write them a check. Call the Vanguard accounting department and wire them the money right now, so these animals will leave my property. I crossed my arms, feeling a cool wave of satisfaction wash over me. "He cannot write a check, Beatrice," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her panic. Terrence stepped up beside me, holding his lockbox of hard drives tightly. "Every single corporate account tied to Vanguard Innovations is currently frozen by federal regulators," Terrence explained flatly. When I submitted my audit this morning, the banking system flagged the massive embezzlement. The feds locked everything down. There is zero cash flowing in or out of that company. You could not buy a cup of coffee with a Vanguard card right now. Spencer fell to his knees in the dirt, holding his hands up in a pathetic, pleading gesture toward the enforcer. Just give me a week. I can liquidate some offshore accounts. I just need time. Please. The enforcer looked down at the weeping former CEO with absolute disgust. He tapped the steel baton rhythmically against the palm of his hand. We do not do extensions, Spencer, and we do not care about your frozen tech company. The enforcer slowly turned his gaze away from Spencer. His cold, dead eyes locked directly onto Beatrice, who was still hyperventilating next to her smashed Porsche. Beatrice froze, shrinking back against the side of the ruined vehicle. Why are you looking at me? She demanded, her voice trembling violently. I have nothing to do with my son's business debts. I am a respectable woman. The enforcer reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper, and tossed it onto the driveway, right at Beatrice's feet. We know you do not have the cash, ma'am, the enforcer said coldly. But your son did not just use his failing company to secure the loan. He put this entire estate up as collateral. And according to this contract, you are the primary co-signer. Beatrice slowly bent down her shaking fingers, picking up the fraudulent contract from the dirt. She read her own signature perfectly forged at the bottom of the page. The absolute betrayal shattered whatever illusion she had left of her perfect golden boy son. Her face turned chalk white. Spencer had forged his own mother's signature to borrow money from a violent underground syndicate. The shattered screen of Spencer's phone mirrored his completely fractured reality. Beatrice stared at the heavy paper fluttering in the cold wind. Her hands shook violently as she picked it up from the dirt. She read the bottom line once, twice, and then a third time. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug into the paper, crumpling the edges. The signature was hers, but the ink was a lie. Spencer had forged her name as the primary guarantor for a $3 million loan from an underground syndicate. He had offered up the very estate she was standing on, treating her financial security as a disposable poker chip. For her entire life, Beatrice had worshipped Spencer. He was her golden boy, the heir to the Vanguard legacy, the son who could do no wrong. She had poured every ounce of her affection and stolen money into him, completely ignoring her daughter Vanessa. She had paid for his luxury cars, covered up his academic failures, and constantly told everyone he was a business genius. And now the genius had legally bound her to a violent street gang. A guttural, primal sound ripped from Beatrice's throat. It was not a scream of fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She dropped the paper and lunged at Spencer. She did not slap him. She balled her hands into fists and began striking him repeatedly in the chest and shoulders. How could you do this to me? Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking as she pummeled her own son. I gave you everything. I protected you. I bought you that CEO title, and you forged my signature for street money. You sold me to these animals. Spencer stumbled backward, raising his arms to shield his face from his mother's frantic blows. Mom, stop it, he yelled, trying to grab her wrists. I was going to pay it back. I just needed liquid cash to hide from Madeline before the divorce. The interest rate was high, but I had a plan. A plan? Beatrice screamed, landing a hard blow against his jaw. You are a complete idiot. You put a target on my back for $3 million. They are going to kill me, Spencer. They are going to take everything I have left. The enforcer with the scar watched the family implode with a look of absolute boredom. He tapped his steel baton against his leg one last time. You have 48 hours to produce the funds, he said, his raspy voice effortlessly cutting through the screaming match. After that, we do not just break car windows. We take the house and we start breaking legs. Have a nice day, ma'am. The enforcer turned around, walked back to the black SUV, and climbed inside. The vehicle reversed smoothly out of the driveway and disappeared down the road, leaving behind a suffocating silence, broken only by Beatrice's ragged breathing. Vanessa stood near the edge of the lawn, her hands covering her mouth in absolute horror. She watched the golden child, the brother who had received all the praise and all the financial support, standing exposed as a criminal who had just destroyed their mother's life. Terrence stepped closer to Vanessa, placing a strong protective hand on his wife's shoulder. He looked at Beatrice, who was gasping for air on the concrete. This is what you built, Beatrice Terrence said, his deep voice carrying zero sympathy. You spent 29 years treating Vanessa like she was invisible. You told her she was not smart enough to run the company. You poured every drop of your stolen wealth into Spencer because you thought he was your perfect king. And your king just sold you to loan sharks to pay for his mistress's handbags. Vanessa leaned into Terrence, tears streaming down her face. She finally saw her family for exactly what they were: toxic, parasitic, and completely empty. She looked at her mother's ruined luxury car and the moving trucks hauling away the last remnants of their fake empire. The lifestyle she had defended for so long suddenly looked utterly pathetic. Spencer tried to fix his ruined suit, his eyes darting around the driveway like a cornered rat. He looked at Kelsey, who was still hiding behind a moving truck, refusing to meet his eye. He looked at Vanessa, who actively turned her face away from him. Finally, he looked at his mother. "Mom, listen to me," Spencer pleaded, holding his hands out in a desperate, placating gesture. "We can fix this. We just need to find a lawyer who can freeze the foreclosure. We can tie Madeline up in court for years. We can claim she coerced the board. We can get the money back." Beatrice stared at him. The maternal devotion in her eyes was completely gone, replaced by the cold, calculating survival instinct of a woman who cared only about herself. She realized Spencer had absolutely zero power, zero money, and zero future. He was a sinking ship, and he had tied her directly to the anchor. Beatrice turned her back on her son. She looked at me standing calmly next to my legal counsel. The woman who had spent 5 years calling me a cheap gold digger, the woman who had tried to humiliate me in front of her high society friends just an hour ago, slowly walked toward me. Her knees gave out. Beatrice collapsed onto the hard concrete right at my feet. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black rivers, her expensive designer dress stained with dirt and broken glass from her ruined Porsche. "Madeline, please," Beatrice begged, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, you have to protect me. I cannot deal with those violent men. I will do whatever you want." I looked down at her, feeling no pity, only the profound satisfaction of absolute justice. "I do not run a charity, Beatrice," I said coldly. "I will testify against him," Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing across the entire estate. "I will tell the federal judge he forged my name. I will give you every single email, every single hidden bank account he used to hide money from you during the divorce. I will be your star witness. Just please let me live in the guest house. Pay off those men and let me stay on the estate. I will do anything you ask." Spencer stood paralyzed just a few feet away. His jaw dropped open. He listened to his own mother, the woman who had enabled his horrible behavior his entire life, enthusiastically selling him out to save her own skin. Spencer stared at his mother kneeling on the concrete. The silence lasted only a fraction of a second before a guttural sound of pure rage tore from his throat. "You traitor!" Spencer bellowed, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger at Beatrice. "You would send your own son to a federal penitentiary just to keep a roof over your head. You spent the money, Mom. You wore the diamonds. You drove the Porsche. You gladly looked the other way when the bank accounts magically refilled every month." Beatrice scrambled backwards, shielding her face as if Spencer might strike her again. "I did not forge a signature for street money. You did this to yourself." "I did it for you," Spencer screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I kept this fake empire afloat so you could pretend you were better than everyone else. And the second things get hard, you throw me to the wolves." Watching her mother and brother tear each other apart like rabid animals, Vanessa finally broke. She clutched her chest, gasping for air. A violent panic attack seized her. Her designer athletic wear suddenly looked absurd against the backdrop of federal repossession and violent loan sharks. She staggered backward, her heels scraping against the driveway, desperately trying to pull oxygen into her lungs. "It is all gone," Vanessa hyperventilated, her eyes darting between the moving trucks and her brother's ruined face. "The company, the money, the family name. We have nothing." Before Spencer could pivot his rage toward his sister, Terrence moved. He stepped squarely between his wife and the chaotic wreckage of her family. His broad shoulders completely blocked Vanessa's view of her screaming mother and unhinged brother. He gripped her upper arms firmly, grounding her in the present reality. "Breathe," Vanessa Terrence commanded, his deep voice radiating a calm, unyielding strength. "Look at me. Do not look at them." Vanessa sobbed, shaking her head frantically. Terrence, my card is frozen. My accounts are locked. I do not have a trust fund anymore. What are we going to do? We are ruined. They are ruined, Terrence corrected her, his tone sharpening. You and I are not. I warned you about this the day we got married. Do you remember what I told you when your mother handed me that insulting prenuptial agreement? Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut, nodding weakly. I told you I did not care about the Vanguard name. Terrence continued, making sure his words carried clearly over Spencer's ongoing tantrum. I am a senior auditor. I make a very comfortable, very honest living. I told you I could give you a real life, but I refuse to play your mother's twisted games. You let Beatrice convince you that my honest paycheck was not enough. You let her put you on a fake corporate payroll just so you could buy seasonal wardrobes and impress women who do not even like you. Spencer turned his hostility toward Terrence. Keep your mouth shut, Terrence. You are just a diversity hire I kept around to make the board happy. You owe me everything. Terrence did not even turn his head to acknowledge Spencer. He kept his eyes locked solely on his wife. You have a choice right now, Vanessa. A choice you should have made 3 years ago. Vanessa wiped her tear-streaked face, looking up at her husband. You can stay here, Terrence said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. You can stand on this driveway and sink with a toxic mother who would sell you out to save herself and a criminal brother who steals from his own family. You can fight over the scraps of a fake empire. Terrence took a step back toward his sleek black sedan, holding his hand out to her. Or you can get in the car with me. You walk away from the Vanguard money. You walk away from the country club memberships. You start over with a clean slate, a normal house, and a husband who actually respects you. But if you stay on this driveway, Vanessa, I am leaving without you. I will file the divorce papers tomorrow morning. The ultimatum hit Vanessa like a bucket of ice water. She looked past Terrence's shoulder. She saw Beatrice still crying on the concrete, begging me for a place in the guest house. She saw Spencer, his face twisted in ugly, arrogant rage, blaming everyone but himself for the destruction of their lives. She looked at the moving trucks hauling away the antique furniture her mother cared about more than her own children. Then she looked at Terrence. Steady, honest, brilliant Terrence, who had tried to save her from this exact nightmare. Vanessa reached up to the back of her neck. Her fingers fumbled slightly with the heavy clasp of the massive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. It was the necklace Spencer had bought her for her birthday using stolen Vanguard employee pension funds. The clasp released. Vanessa pulled the heavy diamonds away from her skin. Without a single word, she dropped the necklace. The precious stones hit the hard concrete of the driveway with a sharp, expensive clatter, coming to rest right next to Beatrice's discarded garbage bags. Vanessa did not look at her mother. She did not look at her brother. She reached out, took Terrence's hand, and walked directly to the passenger side of his sedan. Terrence opened the door for her. She slid into the seat, staring straight ahead. Terrence closed the door with a solid, satisfying thud. He walked around to the driver's side, gave me a brief, respectful nod, and got into his car. The engine purred to life, and the sedan rolled smoothly down the driveway, out through the iron gates, and disappeared down the street. The silence that fell over the estate was deafening. Spencer stood frozen in the middle of the driveway. He looked at the spot where his sister's car used to be. He looked at his mistress, Kelsey, who was quietly inching her way down the edge of the property line, desperately trying to escape before the police arrived. He looked at his mother, who was sobbing into her hands, completely indifferent to his existence. For the first time in his 35 years of privileged, pampered life, Spencer Vanguard was entirely hopelessly isolated. Spencer stood frozen in the middle of the driveway. He looked at the spot where his sister's car used to be. He looked at his mistress, Kelsey, who was quietly inching her way down the edge of the property line, desperately trying to escape before the police arrived. He looked at his mother, who was sobbing into her hands, completely indifferent to his existence. For the first time in his 35 years of privileged, pampered life, Spencer Vanguard was entirely hopelessly isolated. The silence that blanketed the estate was heavy and absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the moving crew continuing to load Beatrice's antique furniture into the massive white trucks. Spencer's chest heaved as the reality of his total isolation finally penetrated his thick skull. He had spent his entire life insulated by stolen money and enabling family members. Now there was no one left to shield him from the consequences of his own actions. Kelsey slipped past the open wrought iron gates, her heels clicking rapidly down the suburban street as she fled the scene to save her own skin. Beatrice remained on the ground, rocking back and forth, clutching her ruined designer dress, and mumbling to herself about guest houses and country club memberships. She did not even look at her son. Spencer turned his head slowly. His gaze bypassed the moving crew, bypassed the repossession notices taped to his childhood home, and locked directly onto me. The panic in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a dark, volatile fury that I recognized instantly. For 5 years of our marriage, I had navigated that exact look. Spencer possessed a notorious explosive temper. It was the dirty secret hiding behind his polished corporate facade. Whenever he was denied something he wanted, whenever a board member questioned his strategy, or whenever I dared to point out a flaw in his logic, his anger would ignite. I spent years walking on eggshells in our home, constantly modulating my tone, anticipating his moods, and shrinking myself to keep the peace. I remembered nights when a simple disagreement over dinner plans resulted in him hurling a wine glass against the kitchen wall, leaving a dark red stain dripping down the custom wallpaper. I remembered the heavy, suffocating silence that would follow his outbursts, waiting for him to cool down so I could clean up the shattered glass while he retreated to his office. He used his rage as a weapon to control everyone around him, conditioning me to fear his reactions, so I would never challenge his authority. But standing there on the driveway, feeling the crisp afternoon wind against my face, I realized I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I did not shrink. I did not avert my eyes to appease his bruised ego. I looked at the man who had terrorized me emotionally for half a decade, and all I saw was a pathetic cornered rat whose trap had finally snapped shut. "You did this," Spencer snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous guttural pitch. "You took everything from me. You handed it all to me on a silver platter, Spencer," I replied smoothly, my voice echoing clearly across the concrete. "I just filed the paperwork." My absolute calm pushed him right over the edge. A normal person would have accepted defeat, called a defense attorney, and prepared for the inevitable federal indictment. But Spencer was not a normal person. His intense narcissism could not process the concept of losing to a woman he had systematically tried to destroy and discard. His eyes darted around the driveway, frantically searching for a way to assert physical dominance, now that his financial and social power had been completely eradicated. Near the edge of the manicured flower beds, a heavy, solid iron landscaping stake lay discarded in the dirt left behind by the estate groundskeepers earlier that morning. Spencer marched toward the flower bed. His movements were rigid and mechanical. He bent down and wrapped his hand around the thick metal bar. He pulled the heavy iron stake from the dirt, the pointed end gleaming dully in the fading sunlight. Beatrice looked up from her weeping, finally registering her son's unhinged behavior. "Spencer, what are you doing?" she gasped, scrambling backward away from him on her hands and knees. "Put that down right now." Spencer ignored his mother. He gripped the iron stake tightly with both hands, his knuckles turning stark white from the pressure. His face was a mask of pure, murderous intent. He had lost his company. He had lost his house. He was facing a massive debt to violent street lenders and an impending federal prison sentence. In his twisted mind, making me bleed was the only way to reclaim his power. "I am going to kill you!" Spencer roared, the sound ripping from his throat like a wild animal. "I am going to end you right here." He lunged forward. He charged across the driveway, raising the heavy iron tool high above his head, aiming directly for my skull. The loud thud of his expensive dress shoes pounded against the concrete, closing the distance between us in a matter of seconds. I did not scream. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood my ground, my hands resting comfortably by my sides. I watched him charge, tracking his movements with the clinical detachment of a consultant, observing a failing business model. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Before Spencer could even cross the halfway point of the driveway, the passenger door of my parked vehicle swung open. Nate, my fiercely competent corporate attorney, stepped out into the open air, but he did not step out alone. From the shadows of the moving trucks, two massive, heavily armored private security guards materialized. I had hired them specifically for the repossession process, knowing Spencer's propensity for violence when backed into a corner. They were not standard security personnel. They were highly trained tactical professionals wearing reinforced vests, carrying a deeply intimidating presence that commanded immediate respect. Spencer was so blinded by his own rage that he did not even see them coming. The first security guard intercepted Spencer mid-lunge. The guard hit my ex-husband with the force of a speeding freight train, driving a solid shoulder directly into Spencer's chest. All the air left Spencer's lungs in a loud, violent rush. The heavy iron landscaping stake flew out of his hands, clattering harmlessly across the driveway and skidding into the grass. The second guard moved in seamlessly, grabbing Spencer's arm and twisting it sharply behind his back. The two massive men drove the former CEO straight down into the hard concrete. Spencer hit the ground face first with a sickening thud. The impact scraped his cheek against the pavement, instantly ruining his arrogant features and leaving a raw, bleeding mark across his jaw. The guards pinned him down relentlessly, pressing a heavy knee between his shoulder blades so he could not move a single inch. Spencer gasped for air, his face smashed against the dirty concrete, squirming pathetically under the immense weight of the security team. He let out a muffled groan of pain as the guard tightened the grip on his arm, fully immobilizing him. Nate calmly adjusted his tie and walked forward, his polished shoes stopping just inches from where Spencer was pinned to the ground. The lawyer looked down at my ex-husband with absolute freezing contempt. Assaulting the majority shareholder. That is going to add 5 years to your sentence, Nate stated coldly. Nate stood perfectly still as his words hung in the crisp afternoon air. Spencer writhed on the concrete, his face pressed hard against the pavement, spitting a mixture of dirt and blood from his cut lip. He thrashed his legs desperately, trying to throw off the massive weight of the two private security guards holding him down, but the men did not yield a single inch. Then the wail of sirens broke the heavy silence of the estate. It started as a distant, high-pitched scream echoing over the tree line of the affluent suburb. Within seconds, the sound grew deafening, multiplying and layering until it felt like the entire city was converging on Oakwood Drive. Spencer stopped thrashing. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he stared sideways at the open wrought iron gates. This was not a single local police cruiser responding to a noise complaint. A convoy of vehicles tore up the private road. Two marked police cars swerved into the driveway, blocking the exit entirely, their red and blue lights flashing aggressively against the sides of the white moving trucks. But it was the three sleek, unmarked black SUVs trailing right behind them that commanded everyone's immediate attention. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. Men and women in dark tactical gear and navy blue windbreakers stepped out onto the driveway. The bold yellow letters across their backs spelled out a reality Spencer could no longer buy his way out of: FBI. The moving crew froze, setting down boxes and stepping back with their hands clearly visible. Kelsey let out a sharp squeak of terror and pressed her back flat against the side of a truck, trying to make herself invisible. Beatrice, who was still kneeling in the dirt near her ruined Porsche, covered her mouth with trembling hands as federal agents swarmed her pristine front lawn. A senior agent with a sharp, angular face and a no-nonsense demeanor strode directly toward us. He bypassed the local officers securing the perimeter and locked his eyes on Spencer, who was still pinned to the concrete. Terrence stepped forward to meet the senior agent. The two men exchanged a brief professional nod. When I hired Terrence to conduct the emergency audit, I knew he would be thorough. What Spencer did not realize was that Terrence was a senior auditor who dealt with federal compliance standards on a daily basis. The moment the board meeting concluded and Terrence uncovered the undeniable proof of offshore wire fraud, he did not just bring the hard drives to me. He submitted the entire digital audit trail directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Wire fraud of that magnitude, combined with newly opened offshore accounts and the immediate flight risk of a desperate CEO, triggered a rapid federal response. "Let him up," the senior agent commanded, gesturing to my security detail. The two guards released their grip and stepped back seamlessly, returning to their posts by my vehicle. Spencer gasped for air, pushing himself up onto his hands and knees. His custom-tailored suit was torn at the shoulder, covered in dust, and dotted with drops of his own blood. He looked pathetic. But true to his nature, Spencer's arrogance overrode his survival instincts. As two federal agents grabbed him by the arms to haul him roughly to his feet, the rich boy entitlement flared up in a desperate, ugly display. "Get your hands off me!" Spencer roared, struggling against their iron grip. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. I am the CEO of Vanguard Innovations. I play golf with Senator Hastings every single weekend at the country club. My family practically built this city. I will have your badges for this. I will sue the federal government for harassment." The agents did not even blink. They spun Spencer around and slammed him face first against the side of an unmarked black SUV. "I demand to speak to my attorneys." Spencer shrieked, his voice cracking, as his cheek was pressed against the cold metal of the vehicle. "You cannot arrest me on the word of my bitter ex-wife and a diversity hire accountant. Call the senator right now." I watched him thrash, feeling a profound sense of closure. For years, Spencer had used his wealth and his family name as a shield to bully, manipulate, and destroy anyone who dared to inconvenience him. He genuinely believed that the rules of society simply did not apply to men with his bank account balance. He thought a phone call to a golfing buddy could erase millions of dollars in stolen funds. But the federal agents were completely immune to his tantrums. Spencer Vanguard, the senior agent, announced, his voice booming over the chaotic noise of the driveway. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage." The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around Spencer's wrists echoed loudly in the cold air. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent continued, methodically searching Spencer's pockets and pulling out his wallet and keys. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Spencer stopped fighting. The cold reality of the steel binding his hands behind his back finally pierced through his delusion. His chest heaved as he turned his head, his panicked, desperate eyes seeking mine across the driveway. He looked at me, hoping to find a trace of the terrified, compliant wife he used to control. He was waiting for me to call this off to offer him a lifeline. I gave him absolutely nothing. My face remained a mask of calm, clinical detachment. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the federal government load the garbage into the back of their vehicle. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The agent finished shoving Spencer into the back seat of the SUV and slamming the heavy door shut. The sound of the door closing severed the final tie I had to that man. While the local police began taking statements from my security detail regarding the physical assault, the senior FBI agent turned his attention away from the vehicle. He held a thick clipboard in his hands, flipping past several pages of warrants and financial schedules. He scanned the driveway until his eyes landed on Beatrice. My former mother-in-law was sitting in the dirt, her expensive dress completely ruined, her breath coming in short, erratic gasps. She had just watched her golden child, the son she had protected and enabled her entire life, get hauled away in handcuffs. She was completely broken. The senior agent walked slowly toward her. His heavy boots crunched against the gravel, stopping right next to the pile of discarded designer luggage that had been thrown out of the house by the movers. Beatrice looked up at the federal agent. Her mascara was running down her face in thick black rivers. Her lips trembled as she raised a shaking hand, attempting to fix her disheveled hair in a pathetic effort to maintain some semblance of dignity. "Please," Beatrice whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please, I did not know what he was doing. He forged my signature on that loan. I am a victim here. You have to believe me." The agent looked down at his clipboard, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. He clicked his pen and looked back at her. "We will look into the forged signatures regarding the underground debt, ma'am," the agent stated firmly. "But right now we have an entirely different matter to discuss." Beatrice frowned, her eyes widening in fresh panic. "Another matter? What are you talking about?" The agent lowered this clipboard. "Ma'am, we also have questions regarding the missing employee pension funds from Vanguard Innovations. Specifically, the $420,000 routed directly to your personal accounts to purchase an antique vase in Paris." Beatrice let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her eyes rolled completely back into her head, and her body went entirely limp. Without a single sound, she collapsed sideways, fainting dead away onto the cold, hard grass of the front lawn. The stark fluorescent lighting of the federal interrogation room buzzed with a low, irritating hum that grated against the concrete walls. Spencer sat handcuffed to a heavy steel table, his expensive custom-tailored suit torn at the shoulder and smeared with driveway dirt. Despite being hauled off his own front lawn in the back of an unmarked SUV, his towering arrogance remained entirely intact. He genuinely believed this was just a massive bureaucratic error. He leaned back in his hard metal chair, glaring at the two-way mirror, loudly demanding that someone bring him a sparkling water and a phone to call his country club friends in the state senate. He thought his wealth made him untouchable. He thought the rules of the justice system simply did not apply to a man with his last name. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. The lead federal prosecutor, a severe-looking man with sharp eyes, stepped into the room holding a thick stack of files. But he did not enter alone. Nate, my fiercely competent corporate attorney, walked in right behind him. Nate was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit, carrying his signature black leather briefcase, his expression as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. Spencer frowned, sitting up slightly, as the two men took their seats across the metal table. "What the hell is my ex-wife's divorce lawyer doing in a federal facility?" Spencer snapped, pulling at the steel cuffs binding his wrists to the table. "Tell this ambulance chaser to get out of my sight. Madeline has absolutely no jurisdiction here." Nate calmly unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a pristine legal pad. "I am not here representing Madeline in a domestic dispute," Nate stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. As of 7 o'clock this morning, Madeline became the majority shareholder of Vanguard Innovations. The board of directors has officially retained my firm as outside corporate counsel. I am here representing the company you systematically defrauded. You are looking at the victim of your crimes. Spencer let out a harsh, patronizing laugh, shaking his head as if he were dealing with slow children. "There was no fraud. I ran a highly successful technology firm. If there are discrepancies in the offshore ledgers, you need to be looking at Terrence." The federal prosecutor raised an eyebrow, opening his file. "Your brother-in-law. The senior auditor who handed us the digital paper trail proving you siphoned $5 million into shell companies." Spencer leaned forward, his voice dripping with venomous, unchecked privilege. "Terrence is a diversity hire. My mother begged me to put him on the payroll to keep my sister happy and to make the board look good on paper. I gave him unrestricted access to the auxiliary accounts because I trusted him with my family. He must have cooked the books. He set up those offshore accounts and framed me to steal our generational wealth. It is a classic shakedown. You really think a guy like me needs to steal from my own company? Look at him and then look at me. You know exactly who the real criminal is." The room fell dead silent. Spencer had just attempted to use his white, wealthy corporate background to weaponize the justice system against a brilliant, hard-working African-American man. He was perfectly willing to send his own sister's husband to federal prison for decades just to cover up his own greed. Nate did not argue. He did not raise his voice or express outrage. He simply reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sleek digital audio recorder. He placed it directly in the center of the steel table. "About an hour ago, Nate began locking his cold eyes on Spencer. Your former executive assistant, Kelsey, walked into this building. In exchange for a full grant of federal immunity regarding the fraudulent incorporation documents you forced her to sign, she handed over the passwords to her private cloud server. She backed up every single late-night email, every text message, and every voice note you sent her over the past 12 months. The last drop of color vanished from Spencer's bruised face. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords completely seized up. Nate pressed the play button on the device. Spencer's own voice echoed sharply off the concrete walls of the interrogation room. The audio was crystal clear, recorded late at night in his former corner office. "Make sure Kelsey signs the bottom of page 4 on the sole proprietorship forms," Spencer's recorded voice commanded arrogantly. "Route the remaining $2 million through the Cayman servers before midnight. Madeline's lawyers are getting aggressive with the divorce discovery, and I want every dime hidden before they subpoena the main ledgers." There was a brief pause on the recording before Spencer's voice returned, laced with a nasty, dark laugh. "And do not worry about the internal audit. Terrence is too busy being the company's token charity case to notice the missing funds. Even if that diversity hire figures it out, I will just pin the missing cash on him. Who is the board going to believe? The guy who built this company, or a guy who only got the job because he married my sister? I will ruin him before he even gets a chance to speak. Nate pressed the button again, cutting off the audio. The silence that followed was suffocating. The federal prosecutor stared at Spencer with absolute unmasked disgust. You just handed us premeditated wire fraud embezzlement and a documented conspiracy to frame an innocent man for a federal crime, the prosecutor stated flatly. The sheer arrogance it takes to record yourself committing a felony is staggering. Spencer started hyperventilating. His chest heaved against the table, the steel handcuffs rattling as his hands shook violently. The delusion of his invincibility had finally shattered. He looked around the sterile room, suddenly realizing that his country club friends were not coming to save him. His money was gone. His mother was currently in an ambulance after fainting on the lawn. He was completely trapped. I want a lawyer, Spencer stammered, his voice pitching high with sheer panic. I want a defense attorney right now, and I demand a bail hearing. Set the bond amount. I do not care what it is. I am a non-violent white-collar defendant with deep community ties. I am not spending a single night in a concrete cell. Process my bail and let me go to a hotel. The federal prosecutor closed his thick file folder with a loud, definitive snap. Bail is entirely off the table, Spencer, the prosecutor said, standing up from the metal chair. Spencer jerked against his restraints. You cannot deny me bail. I am not a flight risk. Actually, you are the ultimate flight risk, Nate interjected, sliding his legal pad back into his briefcase. When my security team secured your estate this afternoon, we found a highly illegal collateral agreement bearing your mother's forged signature. You owe $3 million to a violent underground syndicate. The prosecutor nodded grimly. We know exactly who those men in the black SUV were. They are currently under investigation for extortion and racketeering. The fact that you owe them millions makes you a massive liability. If we let you walk out the front doors of this building, you will either flee the country to escape them, or they will put a bullet in your head before you even make it to a hotel lobby. For your own safety, and to ensure you actually stand trial for defrauding Vanguard Innovations, the judge has already denied bond. Spencer's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. You are going straight to county lockup, the prosecutor finished, gesturing to the heavy steel door. You will remain in a maximum security cell until your trial begins. The heavy door swung open. Two armed federal marshals stepped into the room, grabbing Spencer by the arms and hauling him roughly to his feet. Spencer kicked and screamed, begging them to let him make one phone call, begging Nate to tell me he was sorry, begging for a mercy he had never once shown to anyone else in his entire life. Nate simply picked up his briefcase, straightened his tie, and watched the disgraced CEO get dragged down the long, cold hallway toward the holding cells. The golden boy of the Vanguard family was finally exactly where he belonged. The morning news cycle was absolutely merciless. I stood in the kitchen of my penthouse apartment with a steaming cup of black coffee in my hand, just watching the financial networks devour my former family. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters read, Tech Air ousted in massive fraud scandal. The anchors did not hold back. They gleefully detailed how Spencer Vanguard, the supposedly brilliant young executive, had been dragged off his front lawn in handcuffs by federal agents. They played the clip of him shouting about his country club connections over and over again, mocking his sheer entitlement. But the real masterpiece was the local news coverage. They had aerial helicopter footage of the repossession at the estate, and right there on the morning broadcast for the entire city to see was a zoomed-in shot of Beatrice. They showed her weeping in the dirt next to a pile of black trash bags and discarded designer luggage. The reporter explicitly mentioned the ongoing federal investigation into the missing employee pension funds. Beatrice had spent her entire life stepping on the necks of other women to climb the social ladder. She had attended charity galas dripping in diamonds bought with stolen retirement money. Now her face was plastered across every television screen in the state associated with corporate theft. Her country club memberships were revoked before breakfast. Her high society friends had already issued public statements distancing themselves from her to protect their own reputations. Beatrice was officially radioactive. She had become the ultimate cautionary tale of fake wealth. I turned off the television and headed to work. But I was not going to my private equity firm today. I pulled my car into the executive parking garage at Vanguard Innovations and parked right in the spot with Spencer's name painted on the concrete. Walking into the glass and steel lobby of the corporate headquarters felt like stepping onto a conquered battlefield. The employees were whispering quietly at their desks, looking terrified about the future of their jobs after the CEO was arrested. The phones were ringing endlessly. But I did not walk in with my head down. I wore a sharp tailored navy suit and walked with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the building. I bypassed the boardroom and marched straight into the corner executive suite. Spencer had decorated his office like a narcissistic shrine. There was a massive, gaudy oil portrait of himself hanging directly behind the mahogany desk. Hideous, expensive gold statues cluttered the built-in bookshelves. A fully stocked wet bar took up an entire wall, prioritizing daytime drinking over actual productivity. For 5 years, I had been forced to attend corporate dinners in this very building, sitting quietly by his side, while he introduced me to his board members as his lovely little wife who handled the home decorating. He used to pat my hand and tell the executives that business talk bored me. He made sure everyone viewed me as nothing more than a pretty accessory while he played the genius leader. I looked around the room and felt a deep surge of pure satisfaction. I picked up the desk phone and called building maintenance. I instructed them to strip the room to the bare walls immediately. Within an hour, a crew arrived, and the tacky artwork, the gold statues, and the ridiculous oil portrait were hauled away and thrown directly into the corporate dumpster. I replaced them with 3 massive functional whiteboards. I rolled up my sleeves, uncapped a black marker, and began mapping out the aggressive restructuring plan needed to save the company from Spencer's disastrous debt. I drew out the cash flow projections and identified exactly which bloated departments we were going to trim. I was no longer the quiet wife sitting in the background. I was the boss, and I was going to clean up the catastrophic mess the golden boy had left behind. I was deep into calculating the operational budget cuts when my desk phone rang. It was the head of building security. He sounded incredibly tense. He told me there was a young woman in the lobby, refusing to leave without speaking to the CEO. He said she was causing a massive scene, yelling at the receptionists and threatening to call the press if she was not allowed upstairs. I did not need to ask for a name. I knew exactly who was throwing a tantrum on the ground floor. I smoothed my jacket, locked my office door, and took the private elevator down to the main lobby. Kelsey was pacing furiously in front of the security turnstiles. The 25-year-old former mistress was wearing oversized sunglasses and a wrinkled trench coat, looking like a terrible actress trying to avoid the paparazzi. Her perfect blowout was completely ruined. The moment she saw me step out of the elevator, she pushed past a security guard and marched right up to the velvet rope separating us. Her smug sense of superiority, the arrogance she had displayed just yesterday in the driveway, was entirely gone. It was replaced by a frantic, desperate energy that radiated off her like heat. She looked around the crowded lobby to make sure people were watching before she dramatically lowered her sunglasses. "Madeline, you have to listen to me," Kelsey pleaded, her voice shaking with forced urgency. "The feds took all my electronics last night. They raided my apartment and seized my laptop. They froze my personal bank accounts because Spencer routed the stolen corporate money through my sole proprietorship. I cannot even buy groceries right now. I have no money for rent, and the press is parked outside my apartment building, taking pictures of me through the windows. I have nothing left and nowhere to go." I looked at the woman who had spent the last year helping my husband drain his company dry so she could buy designer handbags. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a kind word. I simply stood with my hands clasped behind my back and waited for her to get to the actual point of this dramatic public performance. Kelsey swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the lobby. She gripped the velvet rope tightly, her knuckles turning white. I know everything Spencer did, Kelsey whispered frantically, leaning as close to me as she physically could. I know where the rest of the offshore accounts are hidden. I will testify against him in federal court. I will give you every single piece of evidence you need to lock him up for the maximum sentence. But you have to give me my old assistant job back. You have to put me back on the Vanguard payroll today with full benefits and protect me from the media. The sleek glass-paneled lobby of Vanguard Innovations was practically holding its breath. Dozens of employees, receptionists, and security guards stood frozen in place, trying not to stare but completely unable to look away. They were watching the new majority shareholder deal with the disgraced former executive assistant who had helped plunge the company into a federal scandal. Kelsey gripped the velvet security rope, her knuckles stark white against the burgundy fabric. Her breathing was ragged, her oversized sunglasses pushed up into her messy blonde hair. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for me to accept her ridiculous proposition. She actually believed that handing over evidence against Spencer entitled her to a corner desk and a full corporate benefits package. I did not say a word. I simply looked at her, allowing the deafening silence of the lobby to crush whatever remaining confidence she had left. When my silence stretched on for too long, Kelsey shifted her strategy. The frantic, demanding tone vanished. She slumped her shoulders, softening her voice, trying to play a card she had likely used to get out of trouble her entire life. She tried to play the victim. "Madeline, you have to understand my position," Kelsey pleaded, her voice taking on a fragile, trembling quality. "I was just 24 years old when Spencer hired me. I was a naive, entry-level assistant. He was the CEO. He was 10 years older than me, incredibly powerful, and he knew exactly how to manipulate a young woman. He used his authority to intimidate me into signing those sole proprietorship papers. I did not know I was committing wire fraud. He preyed on my innocence. We are both victims of the same terrible man. We should be supporting each other." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at her audacity. The sheer nerve required to look a woman in the eye and claim feminist solidarity after actively participating in a plot to bankrupt her during a divorce was almost impressive. "A naive victim," I repeated, keeping my voice perfectly level so it carried clearly across the quiet marble lobby. "That is a fascinating narrative, Kelsey. I am sure it sounded incredibly convincing when you were crying in front of the federal prosecutors yesterday." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored navy blazer and pulled out a single neatly folded sheet of printer paper. Unfortunately for you, I continued unfolding the paper with deliberate, agonizing slowness. "My brother-in-law, Terrence, is an exceptionally thorough auditor. When he seized the corporate servers yesterday morning, he did not just find the offshore wire transfers. He recovered the entire archive of your supposedly deleted company emails, including the ones you sent from your Vanguard workstation to your personal friends." The remaining color drained completely out of Kelsey's face. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. I held the paper up and read the text aloud, making sure my pronunciation was crisp and clear. An email sent by Kelsey to 3 recipients on October 14th, exactly 2 weeks before Spencer filed for divorce. I cleared my throat and read her exact words. "Spencer is completely wrapped around my finger. I am officially stealing the CEO from his boring, number-crunching wife. He promised me a villa in Malibu, but I told him I am not signing any more of those boring offshore account papers until he wires another $200,000 into the Cayman account. I need that cash secured before his wife's divorce lawyers start snooping around the main ledgers." I lowered the paper and looked directly into Kelsey's horrified, tear-filled eyes. "You were not a manipulated, naive girl," I stated coldly. "You were an active, enthusiastic co-conspirator. You knew exactly what those offshore accounts were for. You actively leveraged your signature on fraudulent corporate documents to extort cash from my ex-husband. You bragged about stealing stolen funds. So do not stand in my lobby and insult my intelligence by playing the victim." Kelsey took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the security turnstile. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, shivering despite the warm climate control of the building. "I have nothing," she sobbed, abandoning the fake narrative entirely as sheer panic took over again.